color in this room are afraid for their lives. Okay? We are frightened. Every moment of every day, I know that I am black and that it matters. I am a black woman before my name is Sarah Jackson. I am a black woman before I'm a student. I'm a black woman before I am a citizen of the United States of America. I can't tell you how fast my heart is beating right now. I'm shaking in my boots because I'm worried that something might happen and the cops might be called, and you know who's gonna go to jail? I am.
Today, the New York Times published the print edition of the 1619 Project. The name marks this month's 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved people brought from Africa to the then Virginia colony. The Times says the project aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are.
It's not about blame. I'm not asking you to feel ashamed, okay? The thing is that my ancestors were slaves and your ancestors were not. Your ancestors came here of free choice and decided to bring along my people not of their own free will to work and build this country, okay? And so I'm just letting you know that slavery still has repercussions in society today. And that is what we're here about. Those repercussions. It doesn't go away. It's not over. Thank you.
A student told me that you're a white supremacist.
I'm assuming that students have said lots of things about me. I don't believe I am. I'm
You
a
don't
white
believe
person.
you are, but you accept that you might be.
No. Well, it depends on what you mean by a white supremacist. What does that mean? I'm a white person in a position of privilege.
Okay. I guess that's part of the confusion for me, is the precision of language seems to be lost in a lot of this conversation.
It is.
On that note, why is it all these black women and femmes doing all this emotional labor in this space? These white-ass faculty members need to be holding him and all these people accountable. We don't need to be doing all things all the time. Y'all need to say some shit. Y'all need to do the work.
Speak up. Speak up.
Where the fuck are y'all?
If you my ally, speak up. If you in the meeting, speak up. Stop showing your face and do some shit right now.
Am I confused about who's getting paid? Am I confused? Y'all, do some shit.
Y'all keep coming to the meetings.
I have to hold faculty and staff accountable for your safety.
You want me to tell you what I remember?
Yeah, what you remember, the first thing.
Sure.
And maybe if there was a feeling before that day.
There very definitely was a feeling before that day. The mood on campus surrounding issues of what's wrongly called equity had been increasing in pressure quite precipitously over the year prior to that day.
Even with the important gains achieved by the nation's civil rights movement over many years, our country continues to struggle profoundly with issues of race and racism, social and economic inequality, and repeated and glaring instances of injustice. At this moment in our history, we have a rare and a critical opportunity to address these issues. I want you to know that this important work begins today. It begins now. Students, starting this afternoon, you will attend a set of required orientation sessions. Go to them. As you know, there are a few requirements at Evergreen. Attending these sessions is one of them.
I know typically when you hear just diversity, and all people are running for the hills because they're like, well, it's gonna hurt, I don't wanna do this, it's too complicated, people might start crying, it's very emotional. And it is emotional, right? And there's a reason for that. And so what we're asking is that you participate in that emotion. And while you're here at Evergreen, not only be here to do book learning, but also to learn how to grow as a person. And this is a piece of that, learning to grow as a person. So we really want you to consider intersectionality. We have a definition up here for you to think about people in the ways in which they embody oppressive institutions and the ways that they don't, right? So racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism are all interconnected, and you can't really be separated from one another. And so it's important to think about all of these things within our own within ourselves so that we can look at each other as whole people and not just focus in on that one area.
It is very easy as a country, I think, for folks to want us to go forward and to think that we are not these people that had these old ideas about race and about issues of difference. It's wishful thinking, and I think that we have evolved a lot as a society, but we still have these issues that we need to deal with. And they're very deep issues. And because we keep sort of averting our gaze, those issues remain sort of entrenched in who we are because we're afraid to look at them because they're very scary and they're very kind of terrible. I think a lot of us think of the KKK as a thing of the past, and that has nothing to do with who we are, and it really still has everything to do with who we are as a country. So as hopeful to me as it is to see us changing as a nation, I also think about how painful it must be for people to have to face those individuals who are still trying really hard to say, no, we should not be changing as a nation.
By saying, I don't see race, I'm erasing your difference from me, from my white middle-class background, and saying that, that shouldn't matter, that, everything is going to be compared against this white middle-class normality or default.
Anything else about the core value, what people are trying to say when they say this? Yes?
I don't want to talk about racism.
Yes, right? Because that's difficult. It's way easier to be like, I don't see race, because then you don't have to worry about it. Whereas if you say, I do see race, now it's a whole other conversation that you may or may not feel like having that day.
I don't value you.
Yes, I don't value you. A lot of people, their race is really important to them. It's a really important marker of their identity. And for you to just be like, that doesn't exist, you're kind of telling them they don't exist in some ways.
Black power! Black power! Black power!
I think that's where that difference between the capacity to have a prejudice against someone and also versus the capacity to have a power over them, right? We can all be prejudiced based on our predisposition to believe something, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have power culturally to do anything about it, right? So for example, the concept of reverse racism. I can be prejudiced against white people all day long, right? I know for a fact that I have prejudices, but my ability to assert power based on my social position is really limited. And so I think that's a distinction that becomes important for us all to make.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our forum, Coming Together, a Call for Action. We have three major goals for today's forum. The first is to continue to learn about the perceptions and experiences of our students, faculty, and staff of color. The second is to create and establish a series of action items that will ensure the Evergreen campus is an environment that is welcoming, safe, and supportive of traditionally underrepresented people. And the third is to inspire every member of the Evergreen community to participate in the programs and activities that we develop in an effort to achieve the campus climate and environment that we all seek.
I'd like to read a list of core tenets developed by a group of anti-racist educators who were on a panel at the Race and Pedagogy Conference in Tacoma last year. The panelists included Dr. Heather Bruce, Dr. Robin D'Angelo, Dr. Cheryl Matias, Dr. Gita Swani, and doctoral student Amy Thurber. In the workshop, they affirmed the wide range of ways these core tenets can be disseminated given educators' distinct positionality and intersections of identity and institutional statuses. Racism exists today in both traditional and modern forms. Racism is an institutionalized, multi-layered, multi-level system that distributes unequal power and resources between white people and people of color as socially identified, and disproportionately benefits whites. All members of society are socialized to participate in the system of racism, albeit within varied social locations. All white people benefit from racism, regardless of intentions. No one chose to be socialized into racism, so no one is quote unquote bad, but no one is neutral. To not act against racism is to support racism. Racism must be continually identified, analyzed, and challenged. No one is ever done. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. Therefore, anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. The racially oppressed have a more intimate insight via experiential knowledge of the system of race than their racial oppressors. However, white professors will be seen as having more legitimacy. Thus, positionality must be intentionally engaged. Resistance is a predictable reaction to anti-racist education and must be explicitly and strategically addressed.
This I believe. I believe Evergreen can create a more vibrant community of anti-racist activists on our staff and faculty and among our students, if we break our 45-year pattern of occasionally turning toward these issues briefly with deep but short-run commitment that fades, fades, and fades. Our words of action disappearing into the background as we return to business as usual. Breaking this cycle will take sustained and stubborn leadership from our administration and at least a doubling of our staff and faculty of color. This I do believe.
We have all the evidence we need that racism exists from the lived experiences of people next to us in this room today, the students we teach and advise, and the climate on this campus, in our community, and beyond. We don't need anything else to believe it. We just need to believe it. I believe with work, Evergreen will be a place where our administration believes that racism is a crisis on our campus, in our community, and worldwide. Since we claim and aim to impact all of these places, the administration will support this by first and foremost working to constantly ensure the safety and autonomy of people of color, encouraging white people to unlearn all there is to always constantly unlearn, and promote dialogue that is absolutely not tokenizing or dismissive.
This, I believe, there's potential. There's absolute potential for positive change, because I honestly still love Evergreen. But I also believe there cannot be progress without students of color's feelings and emotions to be considered valid and important rather than denied.
I believe we, most white people, don't know what we don't know. I believe that we all come to engaging with difference, with racism, with our own personal journeys, informed by our race, our privilege or lack thereof, our life experiences, and if we're lucky, our influential teachers. I believe Evergreen has the potential to create a community where leaning into this work and elevating our capacity to teach and learn across and about race, racism, oppression, and privilege is the norm. I believe deeply in the critical and audacious goal of eliminating racism and violence in our world. I believe we're all privileged to engage in that work in a learning community that wants to be better. And I believe we have the will to do so.
The students of color need to be placed at the center of our work, and we need to see and value the assets that they bring and not position them as problems to be solved. This work requires us to be vulnerable and to say when we don't know how, and how we can look to the colleagues that we have around us to build and sustain capacity. This work is never done. This work is an ongoing process. If you think that we arrive when we get there and we're done and we can check it off our list, then we will be back in 5 years or 10 years with the same kind of questions. This is ongoing work. And I'm remembering as I think about doing this work, and even as I thought about coming over here today, I was like, I'm tired. And I'm tired of talking about race because it had been a difficult last couple of weeks talking about race and moving the conversation. And then you reminded me of my father, who was a construction worker, who got up in most extreme weather for minimum wage, because that was the only job he could do. And he never once said he was tired. So I caution us to think about, while we're tired perhaps of hearing it or doing the work, that we must continue to do the work.
So what do student protesters want? This was gathered around all the recent protests that have happened on college campuses. And the number one is increase the diversity of the professors. And that's why I think it's really important to focus there, because we often want to kind of, how do I get my students to understand this? And that is critical, but that is functioning to have us not look at ourselves as faculty, right? Whenever someone asks, how do I get so-and-so to understand this? I mean, that's important, but in that moment, the move you're making is the assumption, I already understand this. This is about getting somebody else to get where I am. And we need to go back to where that relentless self-reflection, humility, and grappling, right? Where am I not understanding something, and how might I be accountable to that? And so not just increasing the diversity of professors, but also requiring ongoing training and education. I think that racism is the most charged, the most complex, the most nuanced dynamic since the founding of our country. And to think that we wouldn't need lifelong continuing education on it, I think is really problematic, right? So one of the challenges for professors or faculty is we don't tend to be lifelong learners, right? We tend to kind of be a little bit arrogant about what we know. And actually, I know that your institution is working and struggling, right, to move this forward, and is putting together a cabinet, is that correct? A council, right? And you can put pressure by, how's that going, and what's going on. And I think as that happens, the racism that's embedded will surface more and more. One of the other challenges to this work is that we think when we start to talk about it and then it starts to surface, sometimes we think that us talking about it or caring about it or centering it is what's causing the problem. And I would say, no, you finally created a space for all that people have had to sit on and endure to come to the surface. That people are seeing something open that makes them feel like this might be the moment when I can start being real about what's going on. And as that happens, then you're gonna have to endure, the white people on campus are gonna have to endure looking at the way we've been colluding and maybe not knowing it. And I urge us to put our efforts on not protecting each other's feelings, but remembering it is inevitable that I have been colluding. I'm colluding every moment of my life. I'm also trying as hard as I can every moment to counter it, but we can never be free of it. And so you're gonna start getting tensions and conflicts and hurt feelings because the fundamental idea of the good-bad binary hasn't been challenged. And that's how people are gonna hear it. And the pressure, I'm sure you may have already been seeing. Anybody see any of this already? And so just, you're gonna have to stay true and clear and keep reminding. It's inevitable. It's good that we're seeing it. If we can't see it, we can't interrupt it. We know that it's here. I mean, don't you have colleagues who you'd love to be here today, and all the other ones that have been here, all your other talks, and they don't come because they don't think it's relevant to their discipline? Okay, so we do need to know how to frame it, so we push back on that. So I can't make you agree or disagree. I hate to even use that language of agree or disagree, but nonetheless. But when you're here, you are required by your job to create an atmosphere in which all children can learn, right? Your job is to provide education for everyone. And when you don't address these issues, you are creating a hostile environment when some students cannot learn, right? So you can believe whatever you want, but when we're here, we're going to use an racial equity approach. We're gonna grapple with it. We're gonna use it in our decisions. We're gonna struggle with integrating it into our curriculum because you work for an institution that's what we're doing, right? I often use, if I was working for a therapy organization and they use the Gestalt method, then when I'm at work, I have to use the Gestalt method when I'm doing therapy for them, and then I can go home and do my other ways, right? that idea that this is trying to control people's thinking, no, but not addressing these kinds of attitudes does affect people's abilities to learn, and that is part of your job. It's a theoretical framework, just like any other theoretical framework, but that's the one that this institution stands behind and that you're going to have to grapple with. Right? So maybe that might be a great note to end on, right? So thank you so much.
As I'm leaving at this point, I know that as an alum, there is no way that I will ever suggest this college to any Black person, ever. And so I just want to be clear, because I know I sort of touched on it earlier and I let you kind of get a pass with this idea of like not being able to comment on any specific faculty who is racist and their like process, but I'm wondering if you can comment just in general, if there is any way that you are able to have any amount of say in firing racist faculty. Is there no process, just as I leave, so I can know, is there or is there not any way that students can not be exposed to racist faculty? Is there anything that you all can do about this when it's so blatant? You have all these people, campus-wide emails. I want to know specifically what needs to happen in order for openly racist faculty to not be employed here.
Yes. Yes. And to do it. That's all. He gonna say I don't have the. I'm gonna need him to get the fuck out though. Brett is still here.
That is handled by
Where is
the provost and by the dean.
that white girl sat him back down?
Thank you. I'm working on my hands.
So when you think about the story of who we are, that we are this country built on individual rights. We are the country where if you are coming from a place where you are not free, you can come to our shores and you can get freedom. Well, then you have Black people. And every time you look at Black Americans, you have to be reminded that there was 1/5 of our population who had no rights, no liberties, no freedom whatsoever. We are the constant reminder of really the lie at our origins, that while Thomas Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, his enslaved brother-in-law was there to serve him and make sure that he's comfortable. So I think this explains a lot. The continued perception that Black people are a problem, that Black people are, as Abraham Lincoln said, a troublesome presence in American democracy, because every time you see us, you have to be reminded of our original sin. And no one wants to be reminded of sin. We're ashamed of sin.
Thank you. I'm working on my hands.